Greetings, Darklings, from across the interwebs. It is once again I, the Duchess, Precious Ken, here for the Sounds and Shadows podcast. Today, I am rocking my The Dog t-shirt of Brandon because, well, I mean, anytime I can wear like a cool emo hairless cat, I dream of having a hairless cat someday. So I have an exciting interview here that we're going to jump into. I will give a quick shout out here to them, and then I'm going to jump right in. So I have with me, this is a Chicago interview. I always love those. And someone who's been a part of the Chicago scene for a long time. But it does two different really cool projects that I like, and it is Dave McAnally of both the bands Derision Cult and Cis Machine is the other project. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Ken? Good to see you again.
I'm hanging in. I've had a rough week, been a little under the weather, there. But and yeah, I figured if you were gonna wear your beard, I would real quick grow one so that we would match.
Very good, very good.
So we've been trying to get this one set up for a while, and I'm glad that we finally did. And I'm hoping, again, you're Chicago, I'm Kalamazoo. We should, set something up, do a show or something,
Yeah. Funny enough, I was hanging out at Sean's, the Glitch Mode headquarters, I guess, for lack of a better term, last week. And we talked a lot about that. There's a whole bunch of us in Chicago that we all kind of play together. It's like, man, we should put on some shows.
I'm only 2 hours away. We have Amaranth come out, and now since I have sworn off amplifiers, PAs, all this stuff, we can just pack it in a Subaru Outback and be there in 2 hours, man. That's a piece of cake.
Yeah. It's funny. Sean Payne, who produces, works with me on Derision Cult stuff. That's like his mantra, man. The less is more, and it's like a point of pride how little he can pack a cyanotic.
I think it's more of a point of laziness for me and Colin. I'm 45 and I don't want to carry stuff. My back hurt, so I want to jump into this. So
sure.
Start out, tell me, because like I said, you've been a part of this scene, not just in playing music, but loving the whole, Chicago industrial, wax tracks energy. And you had something in your past that you saw, you heard, it was an album, it was a show, it was something, and a light went off and you went, this is me for life, man.
Yeah.
This is it.
Funny how that works with people.
Tell me about what it was and what hit your heart and said, I'm in for life on this now.
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in Iowa, and and kind of before I found out about, or really kind of got into industrial, I was a thrash metal kid,
Really, I never would have guessed by what you got going on there.
Yeah, nothing gets by people these days. But
well, I'm an astute journalist.
Yeah, so and I still am. I love all that old stuff, but a guitar player in high school and a lot of bands like that, and I kind of came out of in the mid 90s, there's a pretty blossoming metal scene that Slipknot came out of. So I was kind of part of that world. And
were you actually a part of Slipknot underneath a mask and just never told anybody? Or
yeah, I think at some point anyone in the Des Moines area code had to, no. But those guys were all in bands that, I kind of played shows with a lot.
Sure.
There's one Dead Front that Jim Root was in that we did a lot of shows. I was in bands that did shows with, kind of Stone Sour before, Corey joined Slipknot. But, around that time, a lot of the, Wax Trax bands started playing in Ames and that kind of area. So I met actually Chris Randall around then from Sister Machine Gun. And that was kind of like where I bought the ticket and took the ride, because I love that album Burn, and that became the gateway drug into everything. I mean, I knew who like Nine Inch Nails and kind of like Ministry.
Sure. That was an early one for me too, as I saw a show with Sister Machine Gun and this band called Die Warsaw
Oh yeah.
that were playing over in Detroit. And I
And
think I was like 15 or 16 and went to see it. And yeah, then we had that talk we were having earlier where later I met some dude named Jim Marcus and was like, wait, what?
yeah. Well, there's another one, man. That album Engine, that was a huge, which is what I loved about that is how that's industrial, there's like the whole dance aspect of it. But that's where things got like, they were bringing funk elements and Sister Machine Gun does that really well too
Oh,
with the
yeah.
and everything. And I was already, by this point, I was already a big David Bowie fan. So then when Reeves Gabrels played on that Sister Machine Gun
Right.
album, and it's cool because now Reeves is on the Derision Cult one too. But
Yeah.
Chris became kind of he was a pretty cool mentor in the
That's
kind of
awesome.
late 90s. I was big on the news group there. In fact, I have back here is the Parker Fly that he used to make Metropolis and the Burn tour and everything on his.
Show and tell that,
Yeah.
bro. Let's grab it.
Now, so yeah, this is I don't really play this like an idiot. I put a Harley Davidson sticker on it. So for anyone watching, Chris didn't do that.
I mean, that is pretty metal, but
Maybe see it. He sort of said to Dave back.
oh wow, that's so freaking cool.
This is actually a prototype too. This is the ones that the endorsed artist got. So
is it an actual baritone or is it just a regular
6-string Parker Fly?
Oh.
But it kind of sits up here with me as a in the museum, so to speak. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, this is the one that did the Burn tour, all the Revolution album, Metropolis, and everything, and
Wow.
in the herd. So yeah, we had a pretty cool. I would just ask him advice on
Yeah.
typical band touring things, and he was always really helpful to me in that regard. I think somewhere in there I was working for Best Buy and I sold him a PlayStation 2, and so that was sort of our swap. But then when I moved to Chicago, yeah, that was a really easy kind of, and I did that in about 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a pretty easy, and that was a really cool time for the, just kind of the scene because, at that point, obviously kind of Wax Tracks had sort of gone, had kind of subsided. Die Warsaw was defunct, but both Jim and Van were doing some really cool things like Everplastic. Van Christie did this project called Echo Head that really was a big inspiration for me with Sis Machine.
Yeah.
I loved what those guys were doing with like Micronaut and all that. But yeah, that was I would, to your point about kind of what the one show was, I think connecting with Chris in the late 90s was really mid late 90s was what really did it for me.
See, I love hearing that. And I think too that there's something special about industrial music in particular. I don't know why this is or whatever, because, like I said, I mean, we branch on goth or dark wave, synth wave, all this stuff.
Yeah.
But for some reason, industrial music, when you talk about a mentor, I have never known a genre of music where people that are at the top of the game to the middle, all the way to starting out, have this sense of taking people under wing and genuinely like doing a solid and helping somebody coming up underneath them. I don't know what it is, but there is just something about the head of the table for industrial music that seems like that is just in their DNA. And I don't know why, but it just seems to be true.
Well, now that you mention it, like even like, even the day, as Al Jorgensen was built, the whole legendary Chicago tracks, and there's like a million bands collected around a group of 20 guys or so.
There was only one industrial band in the 90s, and whoever was drunkest played drums. That's my favorite Al Jorgensen quote.
Yeah, so I kind of think that maybe that had to do with it. And
sure.
I also sort of think that, because the thing is, that's also, I'm sort of a big outlaw country guy too. And
I did a post the other day where I was just on the Last of Us episode where I had Hank Sr. there. And I was like, I'm sorry, but Hank Sr. is goth as fuck. And anybody else who says different is wrong.
Oh, Towns Van Zandt and some of that stuff is really dark. But some of the new stuff going on with like what Cody Jinks and Whitey Morgan and some of these guys, there's a similar vibe. And I think some of it has to do with you know, industrial music for what it is. It's not something that I feel like you do with the sense of like being big and famous and making it. I mean, you do this, you get into
You got to
this
do it for the heart.
for the heart, and also yeah, kind of the social circle it offers. So I
Yeah.
think that that kind of might have something to do with it. And I noticed that in some other genres that are similar. But what's really been great about industrial is at least for me is you know, we're working on some remixes right now, and it's a really cool genre to be able to give to somebody and have them take what you did, mash it up and make it something totally different. And there's not a lot, at least for me, like you wouldn't get that with like metal, you know. There's not
No,
metal.
I think you're right. And I think the other thing is every other genre lends well to industrial as a remix. So you as a remix, I mean, I don't care if it's like a Pogues cover band or whatever, like
Yeah,
you can do a badass industrial remix of that. You could
that's
do
true.
folk, you could do country, you could do, you know, rock, no matter what, you put a drum machine, you're
Yeah.
going to get a cool effect, you know?
You know, Shooter Jennings did now I'm like that for his dad. Waylon and the I forget what it's called, but he did exactly that. Took like Waymore's blues and you know, outlaw bit and everything, and like made industrial versions of them. And it's I dig it. I think it's cool.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah,
Have
I
you
think
heard GW Childs on Cop International? I just did an interview with him a month or so ago.
no, I hadn't heard
I
that.
will send it over to you. You will absolutely love it. He did an EP that John Fryer produced,
Oh,
and he did all like old country songs
oh wait,
done
yeah,
as like kind of club like Eurasia, you know, style like upbeat club hits, and it's awesome.
really, yeah, okay. I think I have heard. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
see something about that. No, I'll check that out.
Yeah, I'll send it over to you after the interview.
Awesome.
So we've talked about everybody else now. We've brought ourselves up to speed. Tell me a little bit about how Derision Cult happened, you know, how you and Shay came together on it, and why this was special for you.
Yeah. Well, I moved to Chicago, like I said, in about 2003, 2004, and
Mhm.
with every intention of, you know, this is great. I'm here. I'm going to plug into the scene, and just
Yeah.
life happened. You know, you know, before we got on, I mentioned to you, you know, spent a lot of time in the ad industry, and
Mhm.
so I got plugged into the agency world, and just that sort of took off. Then I got really into, you know, like racing and stuff. I was a competitive triathlon guy for a while.
Like
And
running racing?
yeah, that and Iron
Oh,
Man and everything. So I
that's
did that
awesome. I only
for
run if people are chasing me. But I mean, that's cool.
well, I do know. Well, I don't even run now. I kind of ruined my knees doing
Oh,
all that. But so you know, that became a real passion. And then you know, I always wanted to come back to music. I had ideas in my head. And actually, to your point about Jim Marcus, and this is a big thing with Chris Randall from Sister Machine
yeah,
Gun too. When I moved and I kind of got caught up in my career,
sure.
wrongfully so. And I think this is important for anybody who's thinking about getting into music. I just kind of thought the ship had sailed, you know.
Sure.
Oh, I'm down with down the road with this career. And, you know, running into Jim, who in addition to Die Warzone, Go Fight, and all these amazing things he's doing, he's also a very well respected creative director. And
Yes.
what I realized and what he really kind of the light that went off, because by this point, like I'd been in some Die Warzone videos, just kind of as an extra,
Yeah.
and just because I you know, love being around it and spent time at Neo and Exit and all that. But there's all these amazing artists in Chicago
Yeah.
that they're also teachers, they're also accountants, and this sounds silly to say now, but it kind of dawned on me that like the quality and the value of your art doesn't really depend on what your day job is, you
Right.
know?
You
And
know,
that,
I Martin Atkins is out there teaching classes and stuff
sure,
like that
sure.
while doing Pigface. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care how big you are these days, everybody's got a day job, you
Yeah.
know?
And and the thing of it was, is I thought, and this is around the time the first Go Fight album came out.
Mhm.
that's an amazing album, man.
Yeah, that
The
record slaps so hard. I mean, all of it really does. Like you can go on a journey with it, but I know what you mean. And it's so I love hearing that like full circle, you'd kind of gotten into and then you found Jim there who led you back full circle to
yeah,
music.
well, it was just such a, and I remember telling Chris at the time too, and he kind of, his response was more kind of like, of course, what did you think?
Duh.
Why did this not occur to you until now? So, around that time I'd gotten married, and I had, it just so happened that, I'd kind of gotten out of the whole racing scene. And so it just, the timing worked out. And so this is about 2014. I started doing some demos, and just, it's only been, and I'm kind of this is kind of what happened with the pandemic with me. It took everyone being in isolation for me to decide to collaborate. But I
I think a lot of people that was true for.
yeah,
It did. It connecting online suddenly became everything. And I
right,
think it
yeah.
actually ended up opening the doors for a lot of people creatively.
Yeah, and so yeah, absolutely. I mean, I worked with Gabe and Microwave. Like, he and I had been doing things for years,
Yeah,
because
Gabe is
he's
great.
also from that same scene as me in Des Moines.
Sure.
And it's I'll tell you a funny story
And
about that.
also, doesn't Gabe kind of have like a metal background too, a bit?
A metal, oh yeah, he
Yeah,
used to,
that's what I thought. I thought both you guys
he
kind of
did
came from that metal world.
yeah, so Gabe was in a band called Smack Dab in Des
Mhm.
Moines, and I was in a band called The Outside and Oceans and stuff that never made it digital. But
Sure.
Smack Dab did a album that was produced by Joey Jordison, the Slipknot drummer, and
Yeah.
Corey Taylor sings on that. And so, yeah, he was much closer to those guys than I was. But yeah, absolutely. And Gabe, funny enough, I met Gabe because he used to book the bands at a club called Stebbs. So. And he was the one guy who he actually booked Sister Machine Gun for the show where I met Chris. So
That's awesome.
so funny how all this comes together. But
Just all full circle. I love
and
it.
then yeah, so we've just, we've just been friends for, God, 25, 26 years now. But
Yeah.
yeah, so in the pandemic, he really inspired me, because he and I had always been doing stuff. He introduced me to Kim, who does a lot of vocals on the Sis Machine
Yep.
stuff.
Of Bow Ever Down.
Yeah, and she's fantastic. And
We have her on a Amaranth track
yep,
too.
yep. Yeah, I
And
know you did a few things with
yeah,
her. I think.
just blown away. I such a professional. Like I remember, and I think we talked about this. We sent her stems, and like 9 hours later, is sending it back.
Yeah,
Perfect. Like nailed it. And yeah, blown
we've
away.
got we've actually worked on a couple tracks that I don't know how what we're gonna do with this, but her and I did a couple old country songs like Johnny June Cash style, and
Nice.
I one's called Purgatory Line, which is an old Drive By Truckers tune, and oh, it's amazing.
I love
It'll
that.
blow
I gotta
people's
hear it. I
minds
gotta
when
hear
they're
it. That sounds
fans.
great.
I'll send you a demo. I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, I don't know what the right vehicle for that stuff is, but I told her, I was like, you could totally sing this old Patsy Cline June stuff, and she's like,
Well,
well,
maybe we're gonna have to get a hold of GW. I
yeah,
work in
yeah, right,
Gavienta. I'll set you guys up.
yeah. But no, it's amazing. Yeah, so we did that, but that kind of led me down, especially with where Derision Cold is now. Sean Payne, and I'd been a fan of Cyanotic for a long
Mhm.
time. He had produced some of Gabe's stuff years ago,
Yeah.
and it just so happened Sean lives down the road from me, not too far. So
I mean, that's always nice when you have that.
yeah, so that's worked out fantastic, and we're it's funny, and I'm wearing a RoboCop shirt here too, so you can tell I've been hanging around the glitch mode crew a little bit.
There
But
you go.
the yeah, so we became really kind of just in the last couple of years started hanging out more. And to your point earlier about kind of the old guard helping the new,
Yeah,
Sean, I kind of look at the world as a guitar player, and Sean looks at the world as kind of more of a producer, sound designer. And
sure.
he comes from the world, Jamie Duffy was kind of his mentor early on. He was really tight with him and the Acumen crowd. And so it's kind of like the whole thing is like this big circle of life. But Sean Sean's very, very cool like that, here's, especially just from a music production standpoint, here's what works, here's what doesn't. And he
Yeah.
doesn't mind me sitting there asking a bunch of dumb questions. So I appreciate
I mean,
that.
that always helps. So you have this new release that came out in December here, called Mercenary Notes Part 1 for
Yeah.
Duration Call. And one of the things, I mean, there's a couple of pretty amazing guest stars where you have Chris
Yeah.
Connolly and Reeves Gabriel's on it. I mean, that's wow.
Yeah. That was
You've got Psionic on there, but tell me a little bit, because I think another aspect of this was I hear the metal. And I love that. Like it isn't, I mean, because a lot of industrial had samples of classic metal riffs. That was a big part of early industrial. But this is more kind of in a Joy Thieves type way that I think of, that it sounds like rock music that has industrial elements over it rather than the other way around.
yeah.
The guitars feel organic. They feel live. They don't feel like a sample that was placed in the drum machine.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why having that sound. I think because of your metal background and your love of guitar, it was important to be that, because that was
Yeah.
true to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, is that there is that organic metal
Yeah.
element. When I originally asked Sean to help me with this, the derision cult stuff I did before this was really and this is kind of germane to the story. It's pretty gunmetal gray,
Sure.
and that came out of a time when like the company I was with had fallen apart because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a really stressful time. So I used the guitar kind of like a heavy bag down in the basement, just grinding out riffs, and it came out that way. And I knew, I wanted to try to expand the palette a bit, and that was a
Sure.
big reason I worked with Sean. And so all
Nothing
the
wrong with coming like a freight train, but you don't want to
yeah.
do it for every album.
Right. And so I came to Sean with very, very guitar heavy demos.
Yeah.
And I told him, I don't want this to sound like a guitar player got a hold of a drum machine and, tried to make industrial. Like, I really want this to feel like it has that, the Chicago roots and everything. And
Yeah.
he got it. He understood where I was coming from, and he understood kind of where the gaps were. So that's kind of why it sounds the way it does. I think, in terms of some of the tracks you mentioned, the one with Chris Connolly and Reeves Gabrels, that originally had a real to me, if there's a Killing Joke vibe in that one. And what was cool about it is when we gave that demo to Chris, Sean and I kind of knew in our heads, and you mentioned Joy Thieves, that
Yeah.
album American Parasite, where Chris was kind of at vocally on that, I was
Yeah.
like, got this track that would be perfect if he'd do it. And he did, and he was up to it. And it has kind of that, like I said, sort of lives in that Killing Joke world in my head.
Yeah.
And so
No, I
yeah,
think that's it. Like it's an industrial sound, it's mixed with a rock sound, but it also has progressive elements. And that's where I hear, like you're saying, that Killing Joke feel is it's not simple music. It's also not simple metal wise in terms of, like you said, even if it's like a, you know,
yeah.
no, it's changing times, it's changing volume and dynamic. There is a lot going on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and well, that track, and then there's a couple other ones where we really kind of leaned into the country stuff with tellies and acoustic guitars,
Yeah.
like Slaves rebuilds like that. And then it was just, getting Reeves involved. That was really once Chris came on, and I felt like, man, we got something kind of cool here. I
Yeah.
knew Reeves a little bit from his solo stuff after he
Sure.
left David Bowie's band. I was in the fan club and all. I was a huge Reeves fan, and so I kind of knew how to get a hold of him. And it's a bit of a crapshoot, but like it's kind of something to go to a guy like that, and hey, I got this track. Will you play guitar on it? And but he was really into it. It turned out he had talked with Chris about doing something in the '90s, and it never materialized. So I
That's
guess it's
so
pretty
cool.
cool that we were able to bring it together. But it just so happened
Kismet.
um, the Cure had some downtime between tracking and when they were mixing their new album. Then that Omicron thing happened.
Yeah.
He couldn't. Reeves is based out of New York.
Right.
He couldn't fly over to London to do any mixing stuff, so that got put on hold for a while. And it just so happened that's when I reached out about this track, and so he had some downtime. So he's like, "Yeah, you know what? I love doing stuff like this." And Reeves had played on that whack on the Sister Machine Gun
Yep.
Metropolis album, and he really loves that sound too. So it just and it's pretty different from what he's doing with the Cure these days. So it's kind of
Right.
like cool palate cleanser between tracking that and coming into mix, So but
See,
yeah, he played on a
it's
few
so cool to
things.
hear that too. I mean, when you're, I don't know, you kind of said in the beginning, it took, COVID to
Yeah,
finally get me to have the courage to reach out and do some of these collabs. And that's just it. I would say to everybody nowadays, you never know. I don't care
um,
who it is. There are a lot of people with more free time that you would think these days because you're stuck at home
yeah,
where you might as well try and ask because you never know.
right. And technology makes it so, I mean, pretty much anyone can do, solid stuff. On the next,
Right.
Dirision Cult thing where, same deal. We had an organ player from Brazil cut this killer, just old school Uriah Heep style organ solo over a bunch of industrial stuff. So, just to think, if you'd have told me 20 years ago that that's how it would be, that, people could collaborate around the world. I mean, we're kind of the same age. So you
Sure.
probably can remember trying to travel back then and explain to yourself
it
what it'd
it
be like.
was absurd. And I mean, you could even talk about some of the famous ones, take like a Dolly's car or something, with like Peter Murphy and from Japan. it, they had to send each other reel to reel
Yeah, right.
tapes through the mail weeks in between, and they never even spoke. They were writing letters to each other with
Yeah,
like notes. That's what nowadays it's a wave file, online 3 seconds later, and you're on the
yeah,
phone while it's
yeah,
happening. It
yeah.
does. It opens up the world for this stuff.
And I think the thing about it too is, especially for artists like that, they especially guys like Reeves, like, and I don't think he would disagree with this, but he's like a player's player. He just loves to play, and he doesn't. I mean, it's crazy talking to him and giving him reference notes, and you're referencing like, remember that time on Saturday Night Live with David Bowie when you did this, and yeah, okay, I can do that, but guys like that, I've noticed, the gig is the gig. He doesn't,
Right.
there's not a lot of airs of superiority or anything. He'd be a very kind guy. So is his wife. So that was a really awesome experience working with him and Chris too.
Yeah.
Chris Connolly was super gracious. It's funny with Chris because he records all the correspondence is before 6 in the morning. I don't know if you've heard that about him, but
Yep.
he does he rises early and jams, man.
No, I remember Dan talking to me about that. We've done quite a few interviews, and I remember when I finally you brought up Saturday Night Live a minute ago. It was funny when I interviewed, and Chris was part of the interview when
Yeah,
I
I
did
remember
Toy
that.
Thieves, and I it was the one of the very few interviews where I went full Chris Farley, where I was like, remember that time when like you were in like
Yeah.
ministry? That was awesome.
Yeah. I think I remember you talking about that in the interview because that was around the time they did that old cover.
Yep.
And yeah, I remember them both being on there. God, what's going on in my brain right now? I
That's
can't.
okay because Dave, I'm gonna bring us back now because
Okay.
I want to make sure we're talking about your thing now. We're talking about everybody else. Tell me, what is the future? You just brought up that you're working on new material for Jersey.
Yeah.
What do people need to be excited about coming up for you here in the future?
Yeah, well, we call it Mercenary Notes Part One because we started with about a dozen tracks.
Right.
And Sean and I, as we were working through it, we knew that we were going to introduce this to the glitch mode crowd, and it would be a new thing, and definitely a different sound. I feel like a big step forward for what I'd been doing with Derision Cult. It just made sense to like, let's not let's kind of make this a little more easier to digest. So we made a decision early on to split this up. And so we're busy working on part two right now. And I'm really excited about that because I think those other tracks go kind of further expand some of the directions about bringing like country elements in, like you
Yeah.
mentioned the metal things. We've got like a full on just Albert Collins style blues in the, but it's heavy and it's in
Yeah.
industrial, but very true to our Chicago roots in that regard. So we're working on that. We're lining up guests. I'm doing a number of remixes right now of just the stuff off part one.
Hmm.
In fact, Jason
Are you gonna
Corbett.
drop any names for us?
Yeah, sure. Jason Corbett from Actors is going to be taking on that track with Chris Connolly and Reeves.
Dude, that's so freaking
Um,
awesome.
yeah, no, that'll be cool. Spank the Nun is on there.
Love Eric.
Colin
Eric always does great.
Yeah, he did a mix for Sis Machine that was it was heavy, man.
Yeah.
I gave him a lot heavier track this time, so it'll be fun. And he's all about making it super DJ heavy. Colin from Slider is
Yep.
on.
Oh, Colin is incredible. I swear, Colin is one of those people that like just takes an image in my head and makes it sound.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if anybody else in the scene that can just turn a sound into pictures for me.
Well, the that cassette he did on Brutal Resonance,
Yeah.
that was super cool. That actually inspired us to do a cassette single of shameless plug of Death Blood.
Oh,
I thought that was so cool.
yeah.
But yeah, no, that's absolutely with him, and we picked a really heavy track for him. Leather Strip is doing a remix on there, and then
Dude, that's so cool.
yeah, it'll be fun. I don't we're kind of thinking through kind of how we would release all this, but it would, in the spirit of collaboration, I just love doing it, and I love hearing how people interpret these things.
Yeah.
On Mercenary Notes, Justin Broderick from Godflesh did a remix on there, and it's turned the track into a total horror soundtrack. So that was super fun. We're working on Sis Machine stuff. Kim and I have a bunch of demos, kind of outside the country things. I feel
Yeah.
like we're always doing stuff. Kim and I will come up with some idea and, hey, what do you think of this? And so we're working on that. And so that's going to be Mercenary Notes Part 2, shooting to have that by the end of the year.
Beautiful.
And then we're talking about kind of what some live opportunities might look like just across the whole glitch mode world. Connor put out that Conrar EP. Cyanotics got a whole bunch of stuff they're sitting on. And then Brad with Brad Blank has some projects. So I'm not quite sure what that'll all be yet. That's going to, we want to make sure we do that right, so it doesn't kind of look like, junior high talent show or anything, but
yeah, no, I love that. And that's all exciting news. I think it segues in something I was kind of interested to ask you about, which is, so today in the Sounds and Shadows group, one of the questions that kind of came up as we're talking, it seems like yesterday, everybody in the universe, like every major industrial or goth band or whatever, announced they were doing their first tour in 15 or 20 years or something.
Yeah.
I swear it was
Sisters of Mercy.
Yeah, Sisters of Mercy. It was Gary Newman. It was Ministry. I mean, everybody. Okay. So with all these, and it wasn't even just them. I mean, it's a lot of the, Susie and the Banshees, I think. Like,
I saw that.
yeah. So with all these legendary legacy bands coming out and doing tours, but for like a lot of them are, you're talking $150, $200 per ticket, and I don't know, like you and I are older, like if we want to, we can go to a set like that, but for a lot of people that isn't an option, especially younger ones who maybe, I mean, I saw Sisters of Mercy, I've seen Gary Newman 4 or 5 times,
Be my first time in May, man.
That's incredible. It's an incredible show. Like, I'm not trying to take away from that because it is an incredible experience and an incredible show. But I guess what I'm saying is, to me, I get more excited about seeing somebody like the Actors and in their prime right now than I would a 68-year-old Peter Murphy. Right? I've seen Bauhaus, I've seen Peter Murphy solo, I've seen, like
Yeah.
and it's just not going to be as good as it was 20 years ago,
Sure.
because I'm not as good as I was 20 years ago in terms of dancing around.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So I guess what I'm saying is, for you, like me, going back out on the road or something to play a few of these shows or play a festival or something like that in our 40s, what do you think is the room left for bands like us
Hmm.
when these huge big name touring acts come through? How do we find some space in 2023?
That's a good question.
It is. And I don't mean to curveball you with it, because I don't
No,
have a
no, no,
perfect
I get
answer.
it. I think and that's, to be honest with you, that's a lot of what we talk about, is like, how do you
Yeah.
the other thing too is, a lot of these bands, they're not just going out again, they're doing their farewells. And
Like,
that's
when are you ever going to see them again? Exactly.
right. And in a lot of cases, the way it used to be is those acts would go out and they'd bring the up and comers,
But
and
now they're all playing with each other. What is it?
right. And
Ministry it's Ministry, Gary Newman, and like
yeah.
Frontline Assembly or something. Like, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that. And then kind of, you know what? I'm seeing Ministry a couple times this year, because then my wife and I are going to him and Rob Zombie and Alice Cooper and Filters opening that, which I haven't seen
Oh,
Filter,
wow.
God, since mid 90s. But
Yeah.
to your point, I think the bigger thing, and I have some thoughts on this, but it used to be that system was, the opening bands. I know, Ayatoya, I think, really opening that Pigface tour a few years ago.
She slays no matter what. Like,
Yeah, but I
Anya
mean,
is just,
that's a really good example of a band that got in front of an audience,
the
come
minute they saw her, they were in love. Like,
right.
it's funny. I'll real quick. Anya, we brought her over the first time I saw her. She came over and played opening for us in Kalamazoo at a
All
show.
right.
At the last minute, it was her birthday, and she was just, we had someone cancel, and she was like, well, I can be there in 2 hours. I would like to come play. I was like, sure, cool, come on out. And I'd never seen her play before, so she goes and opens, and I
Didn't
stood there in the audience and watched it. And I look at Colin, I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to get on stage and sing after that? Did
yeah.
you see that? It wrecked my world, dude. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
You know what's funny about her, to go on a sidetrack? So before she moved to Chicago, she lived in a town called Waterloo, Iowa,
Yep.
which is where I was born, which is where Dan Milligan from the Joy Thieves is from too, and also John Wayne Gacy. So the three of us have we're the Chicago
And
transplants.
Mary's Window, who I just interviewed the other
Oh,
day.
that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a few others, but it's kind of funny because so Anya was in a band with a bunch of guys I used to be in a band with before she started doing her thing called
Yeah,
Burning.
she was into metal too.
That's actually where I first saw her, in Waterloo, at a playing in that band, and you can kind of tell she's the star of this thing, you know. But yeah,
I
it's
got a feeling Anya is the star of every room she's ever been in.
yeah. Dan and I joke about that all the time. Like, what are the odds? Like, and now Dan from Joy Thieves, same way. He lives
Yep.
not far from here, and it's just it's so funny, all the things that came out of that tiny little town. Now
Yeah,
it's
that's so cool.
but yeah, to your point about the touring, I think that'll be interesting to see. But I'm kind of inspired by the sense that, as those old acts go out, um, you know, they are drawing money, and there
Sure.
was a period there in the late 2000s where this stuff, good luck, I mean, Ministry, that there was a tour there in the mid 2000s that was, I think it had to cancel a whole bunch of dates, because I
Yep.
might be wrong on that, but so
No,
the
no,
fact that
it's
these
true. It
things
did
are
happen.
going strong, I think is a good thing. I think, if you look at, sometimes I nerd out on Spotify numbers and stuff, and it looks like if this stuff's on the rise in general, I feel like all boats will kind of rise with the tide a little bit.
I think you got something there. I think that definitely can be true. I mean, like I said, it might be hard for a while to find places for mid bands, or to
Yeah,
find space with all these big ones touring. But at the same time, if it's bringing eyes and ears to industrial, goth, dark wave, synth wave. Eventually those bands are going to be done with their farewell tour, and in theory someone is going to slide into those places, because
Yeah,
of the buzz created.
right. And that, in some ways, I've been in those kind of cycles before. Like in the night, I remember when, because I started kind of coming into musical scenes around the time like Nirvana got big, and
Sure.
suddenly everybody had to have a band, and not all of them were great, but that really kind of created this oversaturation thing to the point where people just didn't, at least where I grew up, people just didn't care. And then when like that metal scene picked up again, then Slipknot got really big, all kinds of bands kind of grew out of
Sure.
that.
And I
So
mean, a lot of times with something like you brought up, like Nirvana, it's not even just grunge bands that came off that. I remember, during that time period, I went out to, I think it was at the Phoenix Center in Pontiac, and saw some band. I heard one song off their album and thought it kind of reminded me of Nirvana and liked them. It was Radiohead. So I went to see them at Pablo Honey. I was like 15, and I was like, I think they might have something here. This is pretty solid.
isn't that funny how that works? That's how it was for me. Totally different genre, but Drive By Truckers was like that for me
Mm-hmm.
too. I saw them opening for my buddy's band, and now they've gone on to what they are.
Yeah.
But I when I look around Chicago, I think there's some really cool shows going to Liars Club, which
Yeah.
is a smaller place. They got a cool scene going. I think as those things get big, and to your point about the money, I don't know if it would work this way, but I do think people might make choices to opt for more independent things.
Right.
And I also think that probably what it does for the local bands, and you mentioned people like Anya and Ayatoya and like that kind of a live show. A lot of the things I saw at Cold Waves this year were wonderful video and stuff
Yeah.
that I think it's going to put pressure on those artists to really bring a cool show or event. Just
Right.
Martin Atkins has been saying you need to do for years, basically.
I mean, no, it's dead on true. And I love that you said it that way. And I do hope that people do both. You know what I mean? Look, if you've never seen Sisters of Mercy, go see Sisters of Mercy. It's something to see. But at the same time, remember that, like, the reason why Sisters of Mercy have the name they have is because someone saw them in Leeds for $8, well, or
Sure,
pounds,
sure,
you,
yeah.
you know and there is a band today coming through your town that's playing for 12 to 15 bucks, that is kind of like I just said, seeing some band that had one album called Pablo Honey is going to be Radiohead eventually. And
Right.
make sure you're doing that too. Get a chance to be in that room and have a chance to say, that was me. I was in that audience, and get to tell that story later on, because it's just as important as seeing some of these bands at the end of their career.
Yeah, yeah. And actually Dan from Joy Thieves and I had a
Mhm.
conversation about this a little bit ago about, live music in general. Our generation really grew up, and the one before us kind of
Sure.
grew up in the golden age of
Right.
that.
I mean, that was the main thing.
It was these some of these bands I'm like, when I was a kid, it was like every 3 months it seemed like Metallica was coming through town, and
Sure.
somewhere that somebody we could trick somebody's parents into driving us to it. But I think
I
so
got lucky. I grew up in Clarkson, right across from Pine Knob. So every year we'd go
oh
out
yeah,
with a pair of bolt cutters and cut a hole in the fence at a different spot. And we could
that's
walk to
awesome.
Pine Knob, so we didn't need to get a ride.
No, we always had to coax somebody into driving us to Des Moines or Minneapolis or something. But I think there was some realities about what live music was like
Yeah.
for us then. But I also think there's a lot of people starting to play instruments now. I noticed Fender had a record year. What was it?
Yeah.
2021. To your point about the pandemic, people, finding creativity. I still think we're a few years away of seeing kind of what that really means, because it's going to take people time to hone crafts and all that. But that
Sure.
might, I think there's definitely a new layer of creativity, and maybe what that'll look like isn't necessarily what you and I grew up with, where we
Sure.
go to the show at the um, not to
Well,
get
let's face it, to your point earlier, everybody now can have a top level or at least a very solid level studio in their
yeah,
bedroom for under 1,500 bucks.
yeah,
Whereas when you and I in the 90s were trying to do this, you had to like
studio
save
time,
money to
yeah.
pay 150, 200 bucks an hour for studio time. And you basically got like 3 or 4 takes. And if you didn't get it, you're bad, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I have a few of those sessions that went south on me under my belt, but
Sure. But nowadays the creativity, the sky's the limit because you can just sit there all night and do 400 overlapping guitar tracks if you want.
yeah.
I don't think you should, but you can.
Yeah, just nail it, get it tight right the first time. Well, and not to get like totally out there with this, but just for some of the things I do, outside of music with,
Mhm.
marketing consulting, and I've been kind of tasked and asked to understand things like the metaverse and where all this
Sure.
is going to go. And, you know, I don't think we're quite there yet. In fact, just earlier, I was kind of looking at some of the live venues in Meta, but it's not inconceivable to think this concept of us collaborating, with artists, could we not be putting shows together on where the musicians are all from different parts of the world? And that might be the way my kids experience live music.
I think you're going the wrong way with it. My dream is that they build a hot 20-year-old robot Ken, and then I wear like some kind of green suit with like little stickers on it, and then I play from the studio with Colin in the
And meanwhile,
attic,
Colin's like in a whole other
but
part of
like
the
our
country.
robots are in Des Moines, Iowa. That's my dream.
Green robot Ken. That's your acoustic gig. But yeah, I'm I wouldn't I'm cautiously optimistic that, maybe like 5-10 years from now, like those things will seem less kind of
Sure.
silly and out there. And it reminds me a lot of, at one point it was crazy to think we'd be listening to all our music on our phones.
But here we are.
It's like you'd be, most that's 90% of people, that's what they do.
It's
Um,
more the people that are putting vinyl on that look crazy now. They're like those weirdos with their Buddy Holly
yeah,
glasses.
yeah,
Like,
right. So I'm open-minded to the sense that maybe what a live music experience will be in the
sure.
future, especially, my daughter, she's going to turn 9 in March. I think about things through her eyes, and she's already super tech savvy, way more compared to like what I would have been at her age. So I'm cautiously optimistic that like some of those things will bring new experiences that we don't even imagine right now. I remember there's an interview.
We're all gonna be Fortnite concerts.
Yeah. Yeah, I that blew by me, and I'm not a video gamer at all, but I can see where it could go,
Sure.
Um
Dave, this has been a wonderful discussion. Before you go, I feel like we did this because we talked about everybody in the universe here. But I always end the interview with we're a music review page, and I want to hear something that you're excited about right now in modern music. Tell me about one thing.
One thing. Well, I was actually just checking out Saffron V's new album, Trippy, earlier today. That was my coping music.
Every time she puts out a new record, it blows me away how much better it gets each time.
Yeah, well, she had John Norton's. He did a collaboration with her, and
Mhm.
I think he mastered the whole thing. He's fantastic. I love John. I love
Yeah,
John.
Johnson Sounds and Shadows, great dude.
Yeah, Dog Tablet, Sis Machina. Gabe from Microwave just put a new album out. That was Friday.
Yeah,
I play guitar on a couple tracks on that, so it's been fun checking out kind of all the other things he pulled together for it. So that's really cool. Yeah, those have been the big things for me this last week. Other than that, Yeah, I'm trying to think about kind of stuff kind of outside our genre that I've been into. What's kind of been sort of just on loop for me lately is that X Propaganda album that came out last summer is it's
Chef's
it's
kiss.
that's on in the morning all the time around this house. But I love that. I'm still riding the wave of that one.
All right. This has been Sounds and Shadows interview with Dave McAnally. We always like to spin out to a song here. So we are going to spin out to Deaf Blood featuring Chris Conley and Reeves Gabriel. And I'm really excited for this. Everybody out there in interweb land, enjoy this track. Thank you, Dave, for talking with us today.
Thanks, man. Good to see you, Ken.
Everybody out there, keep it dark, yeah.